character, about a coward and his behaviour. There's a vast difference between the two, and I've qualified that on a number of occasions. So if he wants to take offence, he should get over it. He's a big boy, apparently. And if you're a big boy and you don't like something that someone says about you, you do two things. You either issue a writ against them for defamation, or you come and debate them and put them in their place. You did neither because you couldn't, and you ducked it, and you did it with other people. But the reasons why I said it is because he's got plenty to say for himself. He is the archetypal, walking, talking, singing canary when it suits him. When it comes down to a situation where there's a scenario where he needs to put forward his best foot in a situation which is shrouded in inconsistencies, misrepresentations, a load of them by him, he should have done a damn sight better than do a press conference saying, I'm not going to say anything, and then goes off and flaps his gums about what he is and isn't going to do, and then tells the world that the media misrepresented him. It's nonsense.
I mean, Eddie, at the time you said you wanted to, quote, slap Simon.
Yeah, I didn't like what he said because it's not the Simon Jordan world. I mean, we did hundreds of media outlets around that. The time of the press conference, we still had so much information to come from the investigation that we were advised that we couldn't say anything until that developed further. We then got to a point where things had evolved and we chose to speak to the media. I didn't want to come on the show. I didn't like what he said. And the key here is I don't think he understands the sport, the disciplinary matters, the procedure.
That's a big assumption on your part, mate.
Okay, I'll ask you a question.
Go ahead.
Through the whole process of this, what would you have done? Forget the press conference.
Yeah, I've heard that bit.
What would you have done in my position?
A lot differently to what you did, my son.
Let's go. Let's go. What
I would have done is I would have taken the best course of action with best practice in mind. I would have looked at the fact, right, that I've got two contracts. I've got a contract with a fighter and I've got a contract with the opponent. And I'd have looked at what my obligations are under both. And I'd have looked at the situation, because you're quite clever, Eddie, you're quite smooth and you're quite manipulative. And what you do is you let the world see the things through your eyes. What you do is you say, I couldn't pull this fight. You could have pulled that fight.
I couldn't have pulled
Yes, you could.
No, absolutely not.
Eddie, are you telling me... Oh, let me finish.
Yeah.
Are you telling me you haven't got a contract with a fighter, Conor Benn, that if he brings himself into disrepute for a failed drugs test, that you wouldn't be able to drop him as a promoter?
No. And the contract... if you let me...
Let me just qualify a bit further. Right? So if you haven't got that contract, which basically means that most people with a sensible outlook would have a contract with somebody that if they bring themselves in the sport into disrepute and can't be fit for purpose, they would then be able to jettison that contract. Given the fact that you are a walking embodiment of all things VADA, right? Everything's VADA for you. You pulled Pascal fight with Buatsi because of VADA.
No, I didn't.
Demetrius Andrade. Well, let me go through the list of
okay.
Let me go through the VADA ones.
Demetrius Andrade is the best option. Go through that one because you don't know what you're talking about.
We'll also go through the Joel Miller one.
No, go back to Demetrius Andrade. Okay, because that's important.
Billy Joe Saunders,
not my fighter,
not your fighter, gets dealt with on the basis of VADA tests that were failing him for a drug in Massachusetts that wasn't a drug that would needed to be failed in this country for an out of competition position.
Absolutely irrelevant. You do realise what you said.
Relevant.
Okay, I've got Demetrius Andrade.
Yep.
Frank Warren has got Billy Joe Saunders, who fails a VADA test. Okay, the British Boxing Board of Control write to me and say, we appreciate that Billy Joe, without looking into the substance, without looking into the out of competition existence, and say to us, we do not acknowledge in any condition VADA testing, only UCAD testing. Now, let me answer your point.
That's not true, is it?
Yes, it absolutely
no,
is.
it's not true.
Well, hold on. How can it not be true?
But it's not true.
When the British Boxing Board of Control have confirmed that in writing.
Am I wrong? Am I wrong to suggest, right, that a VADA test or any private laboratory test that is sanctioned or under the accreditation of WADA, then, if it brings an adverse finding, gets then brought into the realms of UCAD?
No, you're wrong.
I'm wrong, am I?
You're wrong because it's in writing from the British contract state, and all contracts under the sanction of the British Boxing Board of Control. We do not govern the sport. Despite you thinking, and many people thinking, we are boxing.
No, I don't.
No.
Listen, no, you think that?
No,
I don't think that.
No, Simon. The board govern the sport.
No, I don't think that.
Let me finish.
But I don't think that.
Okay, let me finish. No, but you don't have to think that. That's fact. The board govern the sport. They are the regulatory body. They are the disciplinary body.
Correct.
All matters regarding sanction of a fight rely on the British Boxing Board of Control. Contractually, in the instance of this, we have two things we have to consider. Number one is, if the bout is sanctioned by the British Boxing Board of Control.
Right.
If it's not, the fight contractually cannot proceed. Regarding the private testing between the two parties, the board cannot sanction the fight. Chris Eubank can terminate the contract. Chris Eubank chose to not terminate the contract. The board, who were made aware of the testing results
On the 23rd of August.
no,
right?
on the same time as us.
Yeah, 23rd of August.
Okay, for the out of contract testing.
Yeah. You had a VADA test on the 23rd of July, right? And you enrolled him because you made a big noise about it yesterday. You made a big noise about Matchroom put the money up, and Conor Ben put the money up to enrol him in a voluntary scheme. But it ain't voluntary, is it? It's a mandatory test as a result of wanting to be ranked inside the top 15 of the WBC.
No, but again, you're wrong.
So,
There's no cost of affiliating yourself with that.
You're the one that said it, mate.
No, I didn't.
You turned around and
we,
said
we pay for private testing above and
you're
beyond
the one that
you
said it
paid
yesterday.
later.
You made a big noise because when you were on your little soapbox talking about how the world should be, you represented it the way you want it to. So the 23rd of July, a VADA test was commissioned on the basis of Conor Ben being inside the WBC top 15, not a voluntary test, a mandatory test as a result of that particular prerequisite.
You have to voluntarily enrol.
But it's mandatory to have it if you want to be inside the top 15 of the WBC.
You have to voluntarily enrol.
But you
Is
have
that
to,
true, though?
Yeah, of course.
But it's
Mandatory to be inside the top
But it's
50.
mandatory.
If you want to enrol,
But
it's
it's
completely voluntary.
But it's mandatory if you want to be inside the
Right,
top 15.
if you want
Right.
to be, it's up to you to
But it's
voluntarily
mandatory.
enrol.
Right.
I mean,
So here we are. You announce a fight there on afterwards, which you announced on August the 9th, pending a test result, which is not relational to... Hang on. Relational to the fight. You get the results back on the 23rd of August, right? Who knew on the 23rd of August? You?
the British Boxing Board of Control,
I never did. Who else?
the WBC.
Who else?
That's again, Simon, under the WBC testing program. Listen,
Understand.
let me speak. It's the confidential procedure,
Yep.
right? That has nothing to do with us. Under that is the people made aware of that test.
Did you tell Wasserman's?
No, because
not?
because one, it was not in their jurisdiction of testing. Two,
But you made a fight, Eddie.
but
you
the fight was already made.
Hang on, you'd signed a fight. Now you've got an adverse test finding.
That's it.
And you didn't tell Wasserman's.
Yeah, because it's
So when did
confidential.
Chris
because
Eubank know?
It's confidential under the WBC program. This is what I don't understand. The British Boxing Board of Control knew about the test.
Yeah.
The same time. Just let me finish.
And what did you lot do?
No, but let me
Hang on,
finish.
hang on,
let me
Simon.
finish. Right? And from there, you don't ask the question.
I did.
No, you didn't.
Yes,
I
I
saw
did.
your interview.
No, you didn't.
It was so flaky.
No, you didn't.
You
No,
go.
you didn't.
It was so
I
flaky
listened to-
because you take your jibes at me, and then when you get the opportunity,
No.
with the governing body
I
who
saw
knew
that.
about it,
I saw that rubbish.
the same time.
I saw that rubbish.
The same time as me.
I saw that bait and switch what you said the other day because basically you said he didn't even ask the first question I asked.
Not really.
hang
Not
on,
in your normal way.
Absolutely. The first question, because I know you've got this little conspiracy thing going on in your little mind. The bottom line is the first thing that went on, and I asked Robert Smith is, why haven't you? How comes you lot? How's this sport run? Is it the promoters at the top? The fight
Studio at the moment. It's Jim White, it's Simon Jordan, and it's Eddie Hearn, and we're live on Talk Sport. Eddie, just to simplify this, Conor Ben, your fighter. Eubank Jr., Callis Sauerland's fighter. The fight was called off because Conor failed not one but two drugs tests. If we keep it simple, regards testing, people understand it an awful lot more. If the failed drugs test, Eddie, had never been leaked to the newspapers, would you have happily put the fight on knowing what you knew? How close were you to being involved in what would be perceived to be a big drugs cover-up?
Because contractually, as I said to Simon, we rely on the sanction of the British Boxing Board of Control. When these tests were uncovered, it went straight to the governing body of the sport, the regulatory arm, the disciplinary committee, if you like, to make a decision. There's also a lot of rubbish about leaking of the
So
press.
you had no control as to whether the fight was going to go on or not? None at all?
Contractually, regardless of what Simon wants to say, and he acknowledges this, and I'm happy to debate it further, contractually, in the fight contract with Chris Eubank Jr., the way that fight gets cancelled is if the British Boxing Board of Control do not sanction the fight, or Chris Eubank Jr. terminates the agreement due to the testing. Chris Eubank Jr. wanted to proceed with the bout. The board took 5 weeks to make a decision. I go on record to say the board made the correct decision. I wish they wouldn't have waited 5 weeks. There's also rubbish out there to say, and I back the board on this actually, where they say the board didn't sanction the fight because it got leaked to the press.
So as soon as we found out here, and everybody else found out, that Conor Ben has failed two drugs tests, were you then pushing there and then for the fight to be called off?
The fight was already not sanctioned by the British
Were
Boxing Board
you
of Control.
pushing for the fight to be called off?
Yes.
On that day?
Do you know who pulled the fight?
On
Yes,
that day?
On that day, that night. I pulled the fight that night. We had various options. Number one was an injunction. Number two was to work with another governing body or regulatory arm, of which I really didn't want to do. The mistake that I made, and I stand by that, and I believe the only mistake, I don't think it was handled perfectly by anybody. The big mistake that I made is when I rocked up the workout on the Wednesday. I'd literally received the letter from the British Boxing Board of Control an hour before. I faced the media, and myself and Kalle Sauerland couldn't believe this process had been going on for 5 weeks, and all of a sudden, what are we going to do? I shouldn't have said, we're looking at our options. I should have just taken it, and I believe the board made the right decision. I had the option, and so did Kalle, to proceed with the fight.
So why did you say we're considering our options? Because there and then it looked as if you put money ahead of morals.
Yeah, I think, look, we were...
Do you regret that?
Yeah, I do regret considering our options. I do, because I think the board made the right decision. I was a bit shell-shocked. All of a sudden, I had 100 cameras asking me questions, what are you going to do? And what I said was, look, the British Boxing Board of Control have told us they don't acknowledge VADA. They only acknowledge UCAD. He's had 4 UCAD tests in the run-up to this fight. Everyone is negative, and we need to consider our position.
I want to bring Simon in a second. Eddie, Sauerland told us on the day of the drugs test reveal that both teams were given specific independent medical advice on the drug in question. He claimed both fighters were happy to carry on. Since when should it be up to the fighters to choose which banned substance they can or can't fight with?
It's not. It's up to the British Boxing Board.
But that's what it looked like.
No. Chris Eubank Jr. and Sauerland. Sauerland had their own individual analysis, medical analysis with Chris Eubank Jr. regarding the testing, the other test dates around it, the test that he'd failed, the levels of the test. And the specialists believed that it was non-performance enhancing and were prepared to proceed with the bout. Ultimately, if the British Boxing Board of Control do not sanction the fight, which is what happened, the fight does not take place.
But you were in line with that. You were in line with that. I mean, it is pretty preposterous to suggest that anyone can have a commentary, irrespective of the PED, to suggest I'll allow my fighter, who shredded weights, who should have been told, it would have seemed, not been told, on the 23rd of August that someone has an adverse drug finding, hasn't been told, according to you, until the second drugs test. He's now fully trained, fully in a situation, going for what I think was a freak show of a fight anyway at a catchweight level. And now you're in a situation where ultimately you and Kalle were looking at an opportunity to be able to use your influence or find an outcome that suited you best. The reasons why you mentioned about alternate routes is because that's precisely what you meant. And then you looked at it, and maybe your dad tapped on your shoulder and gave you a bit of advice and said, son, let's have a listen to this. You go and get an injunction against the British Boxing Board of Control. First of all, you're probably not likely to get it. Second of all, if you do get it, son, what's going to happen is you're going to be the promoter that put on a fight with a boxer overcoming a technicality in a drug situation. So you were done. So then what you did is you regained your composure and thought, I'm not having any of this, and I'll pare back from it. But if you look at the whole sequence of events, the lot of you, Kalle, you, and the fighter had an opportunity to deal with the British Boxing Board of Control. An adverse finding goes to them. Despite your protestations, any WADA accredited laboratory finds an adverse finding, then gets caught by UCAD. So with that in mind, the British Boxing Board of Control asked your fighter to give them some information. He refused. He told him to go do one. And then what they did was they sanctioned him there on afterwards not because of the refusal to provide them with tests, but because he refused to cooperate with them in their investigation to find out what the hell was going on.
No, they didn't sanction him. The board have made it clear with precedents that they do not acknowledge VADA testing. This is the whole issue around their rules. They only acknowledge...
They acknowledge adverse...
VADA.
Yes, they do,
no,
Eddie.
They don't.
Yes,
Simon, you're not aware of... we had the whole situation with Billy Joe Saunders.
Tell you what, the British Boxing Board of Control...
Yeah, who now say, we need to look at our rules.
Because you've already told them and said they're liars, right?
Oh, I didn't say they're liars.
You said it was a...